This video is going to talk about the beginner experience when trying to break into the React ecosystem for the first time. So currently the React ecosystem has a lot of truly amazing libraries, but it's really up to you to understand them and to figure out how to piece them together in order to build a functioning application with a good client-side architecture. And the challenge with this approach is that it creates an uphill climb for people who are just starting out in React. There's a lot they're asked to learn before they can really get started and feel capable. The rest of this video is going to walk through one variant of that experience in order to provide a foundation for one of the problems that Lore is trying to address, which is reducing the learning curve required to build large React applications. And to illustrate this beginner's journey, we're going to be using this island that we'll refer to as React Island, and it represents the basic competency with the React ecosystem. So once we get to this island, we're going to be a software development superhero, and we'll be able to build React applications and be imbued with all the benefits the ecosystem provides. But for now, we're just this adventurous beginner. To get to this island, we first need to cross this bridge, and this represents the beginner's journey. And just as we start crossing the bridge, we're presented with our first challenge, putting something we can interact with in the browser. Since this video is about React development, naturally that's what we'll be using. So in order to learn React, we're going to start by navigating to the React website. And when we do, we'll find this tutorial. And if we follow it, we'll end up building this nifty commenting app that we can play with in the browser. But this tutorial takes a shortcut in order to simplify the beginner's experience, which is that it uses an in-browser transformation to convert the JSX code to JavaScript that the browser can understand. So while at this point we have conquered the first challenge, we are quickly presented with our second one, which is learning how to build applications in a way that is appropriate for a production environment. For that, we're going to be selecting Webpack as our build system and navigating to their website to learn more about it. Once we do, we'll find another tutorial, and when we follow it, we'll learn about some Webpack concepts, like entry points that tell Webpack what it should build, output that tells Webpack where it should put what it builds, loaders to teach Webpack how to load different file types, and plugins to extend Webpack's behavior and teach it to perform behaviors like minification and hot reloading. And once we go through all of that, we'll end up with a Webpack config file that might look something like this. But recall that our original goal was to learn how to convert the JSX code in the tutorial into JavaScript the browser could understand without using an in-browser transformation. And this is not something the tutorial covers. So while we learned some cool things about Webpack, we're still not sure how to accomplish what we set out to do. And if we look back at the React example, we can see that the transformation was done by a library called Babel, which is a JavaScript transpiler. So at this point, we could go learn all about Babel and transpiling and how to integrate that into Webpack. But that's a bit much, just to try to figure out how to build a React app in a production-appropriate manner, especially seeing as we're just starting out. So instead, we're just going to Google Webpack config for React and hopefully find something good that we can copy-paste into our project. And with that, we've completed the build step, and we move forward once again. So the next challenge that pops up is for our application's architecture. And the reason this challenge appears is because the app we built following the React tutorial made server calls from the components to fetch and create data. And this is really not something that you should be doing for anything beyond trivial applications. So now we need to learn how to manage the data flow in our application. If we continue to explore the React documentation, we'll eventually stumble on Flux, which is a unidirectional data flow recommended for React applications. And if we watch the video, we'll learn about concepts like action creators and actions and dispatchers and stores. And if we also follow the tutorial, we'll start to understand that a better way to build our React example would be to first create some stores and get our data from those stores and not directly from the server, to subscribe to those stores for changes, and to create data through actions. But since Flux is really more of a design pattern than a framework, it's not really that concrete of a solution to build our application from. And that brings us to Redux. While Redux is also not a React framework, it does provide more support and guidance for building applications than Flux does. It also has great documentation, and there's a free video course on egghead.io from the creator, Dan Abramov. And if we churn through all of that, we'll understand that Redux is similar to Flux, but it introduces some additional concepts like reducers, middleware, and a provider. So now if we go back to our React tutorial, we'll know that we should create reducers to build our application state. We should create a store from those reducers, and we need to wrap our application in provider in order to give our components access to the store. Then if we dive back into our component, we'll learn that we should access the store through context, subscribe to the Redux store to learn about state changes, extract the data we want from the store's state, and bind our actions to the store's dispatch method before we call them. Alternately, we can switch to a simpler pattern and use the connect decorator, which will allow our components to declare what data they need through props alone. With this approach, we would wrap our component in the connect decorator and give it two functions. The first declares what data we need from the store's state, and the second would allow us to bind actions to dispatch outside the component, keeping our components more pure. Now, Redux is amazing, but it is a lot to absorb, and it can be really difficult for people just starting out to grasp it all as they try to move forward. Client-side architecture is not a beginner topic. Remember, at this stage, we're still just trying to build our first production-appropriate application. So at this point, some people may be wondering whether to stick with React or not. But in this story, we're really sold on the value proposition for React and believe it will be worth it. So we're going to keep moving forward. And with that, we have conquered our third challenge, and we understand the basics of React architecture. Now at this point, I would say that the hardest beginner challenges are definitely behind us, but there are still some challenges left before we can make it to the island and are able to build React applications. And the next challenge is routing. To illustrate why routing is important, we're going to be using a mocked-up experience from InVision for an example application called Simply Social. InVision is a user interface, user experience prototyping tool, and if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth a look. It is a fantastic tool, and the company itself is amazing. When you first create an account, InVision supplies some mocked-up experiences to demonstrate the application's features. This mock-up in the middle is for an experience called Simply Social, and that's what we're going to be using to illustrate routing. So let's say you build an application that is a social aggregator. So here we're looking at a list of posts that people have created. And if we click on Sam's post at the bottom, we are taken to a different experience where we can read the full contents of the post. But there's a problem here. The URL didn't change to reflect the fact that the content we're looking at is a different experience than what we saw on the home page. So if we end up sending this link to someone else or refreshing the page, we end up back on the home page and not on the page where we can read the post. A better experience would be enabled if when we click on the post, we're taken to that experience, but this time the URL changes to reflect the new experience. So now if we send this link to someone or refresh the page, we end up exactly where we expected to be, and this concern is called routing. And to solve that problem, we're going to look at React Router. We'll start by reading through the docs and following some tutorials, and once we're done, we'll learn that we need to go back to the root of our React example application, and we need to pull in React Router, set the type of history that we want, be it hashtag or push state, and define the structure of our application using routes. We'll also need to go back into our components and pull in link from React Router and use that for navigation instead of tracking navigation changes in component state. Or if we need to make changes programmatically, we can get router from context and we can use that instead. With those changes, our application now supports routing, and this challenge is conquered. The final challenge as we move closer to React Island and building our first production application is publishing to the web so that other people can find what we create. And for that, we're going to walk through some common publishing concerns using two popular options for hosting single-page applications, Surge and GitHub Pages. Now, choosing where to publish is a fairly personal decision, but there are some concerns and things we need to think about in order to choose a suitable partner for our needs. Now, free is always nice, and after we explore a little, we learn that both platforms will host our application for free on a branded but secure HTTPS domain. They'll also both host a non-HTTPS custom domain, such as myapp.com, which might also be acceptable for our needs. But if our application is going to require authentication or any kind of secure communication, then we'll want to use HTTPS. And in that case, Surge might be the better option, as we can obtain that for a small monthly fee, whereas GitHub does not offer HTTPS support for custom domains at all. So next, we'll need to consider what kind of routing support we need. If we're happy using hashtag routes, then either platform will work just fine. But if we want to use push state routes for cleaner, more traditional URLs, then we'll need to go with Surge, as that is not something supported by GitHub Pages. Another thing we'll want to consider is whether or not we want to block access to our application while it's being developed, so that only people we grant access to can view it, such as a client. In that case, Surge can help us out once again for a small monthly fee, whereas it's important to know that whatever we deploy to GitHub Pages will be viewable by anyone who knows the URL. So based on the answers to questions like the ones we just walked through, we'll end up selecting a platform we want to publish to, and then we just need to figure out how to. Deploying can be a little tricky sometimes, especially for the first time, but in this case, both of these platforms are fairly painless to deploy to once we get the right recipe. With Surge, we just need to install the CLI and run Webpack, and then we can push our code up with a simple command. GitHub Pages is a little more complex, but with a minimal gulp file and a little help from gulp GH-Pages library, we can get our code up on GitHub Pages no problem. And with that, we have conquered our last challenge and made it all the way across the bridge. Yay! At this point, we have now landed on React Island and are now imbued with the full beginner developer superpowers. So revisiting where we started this video, there's a lot of really great things that we learned getting across this bridge as part of our journey to develop our first React application that is appropriate for a production environment. But it was definitely an uphill climb as we learned about React and the other libraries in the ecosystem and how to integrate them all together into a functional application. There are a lot of different concepts and APIs that we need to get comfortable with before we can really start to feel capable in React. And this is one of the problems that Lore is really trying to help with by simplifying the initial getting started experience to make it easier for people to build serious applications with React, but without replacing any of the core libraries that already exist in the ecosystem. And so, since we are all about analogies in this video, we're going to use a vacation island to represent the experience that Lore is striving to create for React beginners. In this case, when the aspiring React developer glides into the island on their surfboard, they head over to the visitor center where they learn about React. So this could be like going to the React website and following the tutorial. At that point, we're done, more or less. So Lore wants to make it so that the only barrier to getting started building applications with React is React itself. The Lore framework will take care of integrating and configuring Webpack as the build system, including supporting multiple deploy environments like development and production, as well as pre-configuring React Router so that it's ready to use out of the box. It will also provide helpers for publishing to popular platforms like Surge and GitHub Pages, and significantly reduce the learning curve associated with integrating Redux, as well as the amount of boilerplate required to communicate with API servers. The idea with Lore is that beginners, or sort of really anyone, can simply ignore all the other pieces in the ecosystem until the needs of their application demand that they learn more about it. And at that point, they can choose which libraries to learn about based on their interests and specific needs. So that's all for this video. In another video, we will explore what the experience using Lore actually looks like. Take care, and thanks for watching.